What if I told you that the real monster in Medusa's story was never her? That the woman with snakes for hair, capable of turning people to stone with a single glance, was actually a victim that society transformed into a villain? Medusa is one of the most iconic figures in Greek mythology. Her image, twisted serpents, petrifying gaze, monstrous appearance, became synonymous with horror and danger. But when we look beyond the surface, we discover a story that speaks directly about trauma, rejection, and what happens when someone is excluded and dehumanized by the world around them. This is not just an ancient tale. This is a mirror reflecting something very real, how victims can be transformed into threats in the collective imagination, how trauma isolates us from others, and how exclusion shapes identity in profound and painful ways. Medusa's psychology is the psychology of anyone who has ever felt rejected, misunderstood, or transformed into something they never chose to be. Throughout this analysis, we will explore the myth from a Jungian perspective, understanding Medusa as an archetype that lives not only in ancient stories, but within our own psyche. We will see how her story illuminates questions about shame, isolation, the gaze of others, and the possibility or impossibility of healing after deep wounds. This is the story of Medusa. But it may also be your story, or the story of someone you know. If Medusa's story is already resonating with you, you are not alone. This kind of deep psychological exploration of myths helps us understand ourselves better. Subscribe to join a community that looks beyond surface narratives to find the human truth underneath. Before diving into psychological analysis, we need to understand that Medusa's myth exists in two very different versions, and this distinction matters. In the oldest tradition, recorded by Hesiod around 700 BCE, Medusa is one of three Gorgon sisters, Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. They are daughters of primordial sea deities, Phorcys and Ceto, born as monsters from the beginning. In this version, there is no transformation, no trauma, no punishment. Medusa simply exists as a dangerous creature, a guardian figure whose very nature is to petrify those who look upon her. This version presents Medusa as something inhuman, a force of nature to be feared and defeated. She is the monster that the hero Perseus must overcome to prove his worth. There is no victim here, only threat. But there is another version, recorded by the Roman poet Ovid around 8 CE, approximately 700 years after Hesiod. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Medusa's story becomes something entirely different and far more disturbing. In this version, Medusa was once a beautiful young woman, a priestess serving in Athena's temple. Her beauty was so striking that Poseidon, god of the seas, became obsessed with her. One day, he violated her inside Athena's sacred temple. Instead of protecting her priestess, Athena punished Medusa for the desecration of her temple. The goddess transformed Medusa's beautiful hair into serpents and cursed her with a gaze that would turn anyone who looked at her into stone. The victim became the monster. The one who was violated became the threat. The one who sought sanctuary became the one from whom others needed protection. It is important to acknowledge that there is scholarly debate about these versions. Some argue that Ovid, being Roman and writing much later, may have added or altered the story. The narrative of violation and punishment might not be originally Greek at all. However, for our psychological analysis, we will focus primarily on Ovid's version, not because it is necessarily the true one, but because it offers profound insights into trauma, shame, and transformation through suffering. This version resonates deeply with psychological realities that many people face. Being blamed for what was done to them, being isolated because of their pain, and being seen as dangerous when they are actually wounded. Medusa, in Ovid's telling, becomes an archetype of the traumatized individual whose society refuses to see as human. And that is what we will explore. Let's examine what happened to Medusa psychologically. She experiences a violation in a place that should have been safe. A sacred temple, her workplace, a space of devotion. And instead of receiving support or justice, she's punished for it. Her very appearance is transformed to reflect the horror of what happened to her. This is where the psychological depth begins. In Jungian psychology, transformation is a central theme. But not all transformations are chosen or welcome. Medusa's transformation is forced, violent, irreversible. She becomes something she never wanted to be. Her outer form now matches the internal devastation of trauma. Twisted, dangerous, unrecognizable even to herself. This mirrors what happens psychologically to many trauma survivors. Trauma does not just hurt. It changes you. The person you were before no longer exists. You look in the mirror, literally or metaphorically, and see someone you do not recognize. The serpents on Medusa's head are a perfect symbol for intrusive thoughts. The constant hissing reminders of what happened, thoughts that never sleep, always moving, always present. The most striking element of Medusa's curse is her gaze. Anyone who looks directly at her turns to stone. Let's unpack this psychologically. What does it mean to turn people to stone? Stone is cold, hard, lifeless, frozen. When Medusa looks at someone, they stop moving, stop living, become a monument to a moment of encounter. From Medusa's perspective, this represents the freezing effect of trauma. When you carry deep wounds, genuine connection becomes nearly impossible. People cannot truly see you. They see the trauma, the damage, the monster, and when they see that, they freeze. They do not know what to say, how to act, how to help. They become rigid, uncomfortable, distant. The connection dies before it begins, but there is another layer. Medusa's gaze may also represent dissociation. Many trauma survivors describe moments where they freeze others or freeze themselves. A psychological numbing, an inability to feel, a shutdown of emotional response. It is a defense mechanism. If you cannot be hurt anymore, you turn your own capacity for feeling into stone. Athena's punishment focuses specifically on Medusa's appearance. Her beauty, which attracted the violation, is destroyed. The message is clear. You are to blame for what happened because of how you looked. This is victim blaming in its rawest form, and it reflects a psychological reality many survivors face. Shame becomes embodied. The body that was violated becomes the enemy. Many trauma survivors develop dysmorphia, self-harm, or profound disconnection from their physical selves. The body is no longer home. It is a prison, a reminder, a source of danger. Medusa's serpents are her crown of shame. They announce to everyone, something terrible happened here. Stay away. In most versions, Medusa never speaks. We never hear her side of the story, her pain, her protest. She is silenced. This silence is perhaps the most devastating aspect of her transformation. Trauma often steals voice. Survivors describe feeling unable to speak about what happened, not just because of external pressure, but because the experience itself fractures language. How do you put such horror into words? How do you tell your story when you know people will blame you, doubt you, or freeze in discomfort? Medusa's silence echoes the silence imposed on countless victims throughout history. She becomes symbol, monster, cautionary tale, but never person, never human, never heard. After her transformation, Medusa is exiled to a remote island, far from human contact. This geographical isolation mirrors the psychological isolation that trauma creates. When you are wounded deeply, the world feels unsafe. You cannot trust that people will understand. You cannot risk being hurt again. So you withdraw. You build walls. You become an island, remote, unreachable, alone. It is not that you want isolation. It is that connection has become too dangerous, too painful, too likely to end in more hurt. Medusa's exile is both punishment and protection. She is kept away from society, but perhaps she also keeps herself away, knowing that every encounter ends in stone, in death, in frozen disconnection. What Medusa's transformation teaches us is that trauma fundamentally alters identity. You do not just carry a wound. You become the wound in others' eyes. The world stops seeing you as a person with a story and starts seeing you as a problem to be avoided, a danger to be neutralized, a monster to be slain. And the cruelest part? You begin to see yourself that way too. Let's go deeper into Medusa's most iconic feature, her ability to turn people to stone with her gaze. This is not just a supernatural power. It is a profound psychological metaphor. In her transformed state, Medusa cannot look at anyone without destroying them. Every potential connection becomes fatal. Imagine living with that reality. You cannot make eye contact without causing death. You cannot be seen without causing harm. This is the experience of many people who carry deep trauma or profound shame. They feel that their very presence is toxic, that revealing themselves, truly being seen, will hurt others or drive them away. So they hide. They avoid eye contact, both literal and metaphorical. They keep people at a distance, not out of cruelty, but out of a distorted sense of protection. The logic goes like this. If you really saw me, you would turn to stone. You would be horrified. You would leave. So I will spare you by never letting you see, but there is another dimension. Medusa also cannot be looked at without petrifying the viewer. This creates a terrible paradox. She needs to be invisible to keep others safe, but invisibility is its own form of death. To never be seen is to never exist in the eyes of others. Jung spoke about the need for recognition, for being witnessed by another consciousness, as fundamental to psychological health. We become real through the gaze of others. But for Medusa, that gaze means destruction. She is caught in an impossible bind. Exist and harm, or hide and disappear. Many people with trauma, depression, or profound shame live in this bind. They desperately want to be seen, understood, validated, but they equally fear that being truly seen will result in rejection, disgust, or abandonment. So they show only carefully curated versions of themselves, stone masks that protect but also imprison. The people who look at Medusa do not just die. They turn to stone. They become frozen monuments. This detail is psychologically significant. Stone represents emotional unavailability, numbness, the inability to respond with warmth or life. When Medusa looks at someone and they freeze, it mirrors what happens in relationships touched by trauma. Emotional shutdown, the inability to connect, walls that prevent intimacy. From Medusa's perspective, everyone she tries to connect with becomes cold, hard, unreachable. They look at her and immediately close off. They see the serpents, the monster, the damage, and they freeze. They cannot see past the trauma to the person underneath. But here's the twist. Is Medusa causing the petrification, or are people choosing to turn to stone rather than truly see her? The myth does not give a clear answer, and perhaps that ambiguity is the point. In relationships with traumatized individuals, there is often a mutual freezing. The survivor expects rejection and withdraws. Others see the pain and do not know how to respond, so they too withdraw. Both turn to stone. Medusa's gaze is also the ultimate defense mechanism. No one can hurt you if they cannot get close. No one can violate you again if they are frozen before they reach you. Her curse becomes her protection. This is the psychology of hypervigilance and defensive aggression. After trauma, the psyche becomes wired to detect and neutralize threats before they can cause harm. Better to push everyone away than to risk being hurt again. Better to be alone than to be vulnerable. But defense mechanisms that protect us also imprison us. Medusa is safe from further violation, but she is also cut off from all possibility of love, connection, healing. She survives, but she does not live. The myth tells us that Perseus defeats Medusa by using a polished shield as a mirror. He looks at her reflection instead of directly at her. This detail is rich with psychological meaning. A mirror allows you to see without direct confrontation. It creates distance, mediation, safety. In psychological terms, this might represent the need for indirect approaches to trauma. Sometimes direct confrontation re-traumatizes. Sometimes we need reflective distance. Therapy, art, storytelling. Ways to look at painful truths without being destroyed by them. But there is a darker reading too. Perseus does not see Medusa as she is. He sees only her reflection, her image, never the reality of her personhood. He can kill her precisely because he never truly looks at her, never sees her humanity. She remains object, monster, target. Never person. How many people suffering from trauma or exclusion experience this? They are never truly seen. People see reflections, projections, stereotypes, fears, but never the actual human being. Medusa's petrifying gaze represents the tragedy of damaged connection. She cannot receive the gaze of another without destruction. She cannot offer her own gaze without causing harm. She exists in absolute isolation, surrounded by stone monuments to failed encounters. This is the lived reality of many who carry deep wounds. Every attempt at connection feels dangerous. Every moment of vulnerability feels like it might end in stone. Either they will be rejected and frozen out, or they will hurt someone by revealing too much of their pain. The question Medusa's story asks is haunting. Can someone whose very gaze causes death ever be truly seen? Can connection be restored after such profound disconnection? Or are some wounds so deep that isolation becomes permanent? Medusa's transformation results in her complete exclusion from society. She is exiled, marked as monster, stripped of her humanity in the eyes of others. This exclusion is not just geographical, it is existential. She is no longer seen as a person. She becomes a thing, a threat, a problem to be solved. One of the most devastating psychological experiences a human can endure is dehumanization, being seen as less than human, being treated as an object or threat rather than a person with feelings, history, and worth. Medusa experiences the ultimate dehumanization. She is violated, and then she is transformed into a representation of that violation. She becomes the monster, even though she was the victim. Her personhood is erased. No one asks how she feels, what she needs, whether she wants help. They only see danger. This mirrors real psychological and social phenomena. Victims of trauma, especially sexual violence, are often treated as damaged goods, as contaminated, as fundamentally changed into something lesser. Instead of receiving compassion, they receive suspicion, blame, or avoidance. They are excluded from normal social life because others do not know how to deal with their pain. So it is easier to simply cast them out. In Jungian terms, Medusa becomes a scapegoat, the one who carries the shadow of the collective. She embodies everything society fears and rejects: vulnerability, violation, uncontrolled feminine power, the consequences of male violence. By transforming her into a monster and then exiling her, society does not have to confront uncomfortable truths. They do not have to face Poseidon's crime or Athena's cruelty. They do not have to examine their own complicity. Instead, they exile the problem, out of sight, out of mind. The victim disappears and everyone else can continue as if nothing happened. This is how exclusion functions psychologically and socially. The excluded individual carries the weight of collective discomfort. They are pushed to the margins so the center can remain unbothered. But exclusion does not just happen externally. Medusa, like all excluded individuals, likely internalizes the judgment of others. She begins to see herself as they see her, as monster, as dangerous, as unworthy of love or connection. This is the psychological devastation of social rejection. When everyone treats you as if you are monstrous, you start to believe it. When no one can look at you without horror, you start to see yourself through their eyes. The external rejection becomes internal self-rejection. Jung called this the internalization of the shadow. The qualities that others reject in us, we reject in ourselves. We become our own jailers, our own executioners. We enforce the exile from within. Medusa's isolation is not just imposed. It is also chosen, because she has accepted the world's verdict. She is not fit to be among others. Perhaps most tragically, Medusa loses her name. She stops being Medusa, the priestess, or Medusa the victim, and becomes simply the Gorgon, the monster, the creature with the petrifying gaze. Her identity is reduced to her curse. This is what exclusion does. It strips away the complexity of personhood and replaces it with a single defining characteristic. You are no longer a multifaceted human. You are your trauma, your diagnosis, your difference, your violation. Everything else about you becomes invisible. Monsters serve a function in society. They mark boundaries. They define what is acceptable and what is not. They embody fears and anxieties that need an outlet. Medusa, as monster, allows Greek society to process anxieties about female sexuality, male violence, divine punishment, and the fragility of social order. But the person inside the monster disappears. Medusa's suffering, her voice, her humanity all become irrelevant. She exists only as a symbol, never as a self. This is the cost of exclusion. The excluded person stops being real to others. They become an abstraction, a category, a problem, but never a fellow human deserving of empathy and connection. The myth offers no redemption for Medusa. She is never restored, never heard, never reintegrated into society. She lives in exile until Perseus kills her. Her only escape from exclusion is death. This is the bleakest aspect of her story. It suggests that once you are marked as monster, once you are fully excluded, there is no way back. The wound is permanent. The isolation is terminal. From a psychological standpoint, this raises difficult questions. Can someone who has been profoundly dehumanized ever fully recover their sense of self? Can exclusion be healed, or does it leave permanent scars? Can society ever truly see past the monster to the person underneath? These questions have no easy answers. But they are questions worth asking, because Medusa's story is not just ancient mythology. It is playing out in the lives of real people every day. Medusa's story is thousands of years old, but her psychology is timeless. Let's bring this into the present and examine how her experience mirrors contemporary psychological realities. In modern psychology, we might speak of a Medusa complex, the psychological state of believing that your very presence harms others, that you are inherently toxic or dangerous. That connection is impossible because you turn everything you touch to stone. This complex shows up in various forms. People with severe depression who isolate because they believe they are a burden. Trauma survivors who avoid relationships because they fear contaminating others with their pain. Individuals with stigmatized conditions who withdraw from social life to spare others discomfort. Those who have been socially rejected who preemptively reject others to avoid further hurt. The common thread is the belief, I am the problem. I am the danger. Others are safer without me. Medusa was punished for being violated. This victim-blaming dynamic is tragically common. Sexual assault survivors are often asked what they were wearing, whether they were drinking, why they were alone. The implication is always the same. You share responsibility for what was done to you. This creates profound shame. Not the healthy shame that signals we have violated our own values, but toxic shame that says, I am fundamentally bad, defective, unworthy. Toxic shame does not say I made a mistake. It says I am a mistake. When shame becomes core to identity, isolation follows. You hide not just what happened, but who you are, because at the deepest level, you believe yourself to be unacceptable. Medusa embodies this toxic shame made visible. Her serpents announce her defilement to the world. She cannot hide what happened. She is forced to wear her trauma as her identity. In our current moment, we see patterns of exclusion that echo Medusa's banishment. Cancel culture, whatever your views on its necessity or excessiveness, functions by marking individuals as irredeemable, casting them out of social and professional spaces, and reducing them to their worst moment or most controversial action. The parallels are striking. A person becomes defined entirely by one event or characteristic. They are dehumanized and treated as monster rather than complex human. They are exiled from community, and often no path to redemption or reintegration is offered. Again, Medusa's question becomes relevant. Once marked as monster, is there any way back to personhood? Not all exclusion is as dramatic as exile to a remote island. Much of it is subtle, invisible every day. It is the person with mental illness who stops getting invited to gatherings. It is the trauma survivor whose friends drift away because they do not know what to say. It is the person who has experienced public humiliation and finds themselves gradually frozen out of social circles. These quiet exclusions can be as devastating as overt banishment. They communicate the same message. You do not belong. You are too difficult. You are too different. You make people uncomfortable. The result is the same. Isolation, shame, the internalization of the message that you are the problem. Medusa faces a double bind. She cannot be seen without causing harm, but she cannot exist in permanent invisibility either. Many marginalized or traumatized people face similar binds. Speak about your pain and be labeled difficult or attention-seeking. Stay silent and have your suffering dismissed or ignored. Assert boundaries and be called hostile or defensive. Accept mistreatment and be seen as weak or complicit. There is no safe position. Visibility invites judgment and exclusion. Invisibility means erasure and isolation. You are damned if you are seen and damned if you are not. Despite everything, Medusa presumably still feels the fundamental human need for connection. Isolation is not natural to our species. We are wired for bonding, for community, for being seen and known by others. Imagine the loneliness of wanting connection while believing that every connection you make will end in harm. Imagine reaching out while knowing that anyone who comes close will turn to stone. Imagine the accumulated grief of dozens, hundreds of failed connections, each one adding another stone statue to your island of isolation. This is the lived experience of chronic loneliness. Not just being alone, but believing you are fundamentally unfit for connection, that your very nature makes love impossible. Can someone living as Medusa heal? Can they find their way back to connection, to trust, to seeing themselves as worthy of love? Psychology suggests yes, but it is not simple. Healing from trauma and exclusion requires several things. Finding people who can see past the monster to the person. Gradually rebuilding trust in small, safe steps. Processing and integrating the trauma rather than being defined by it. Challenging the internalized belief that you are inherently harmful. Learning that vulnerability, while risky, is also the path to genuine connection. But it also requires something from society. The willingness to see Medusa as human, to approach with compassion rather than fear, to risk connection even when the petrified statues stand as warning. Healing cannot happen in isolation. The excluded need to be welcomed back. The monster needs to be seen as person, and that requires others to have the courage Perseus lacked. to look directly, to truly see, without turning to stone. We have journeyed through Medusa's story from multiple angles: mythological, psychological, social. Now, let's bring it home. From a Jungian perspective, Medusa is not just an ancient character or a metaphor for trauma survivors. She is an archetype that lives in the collective unconscious and can manifest in anyone's psyche under the right conditions. We all have moments when we feel monstrous, when we believe our pain or our presence harms others, when we want to hide our true selves for fear of rejection. We all carry some version of the serpents. The intrusive thoughts, the shame, the fear that we are fundamentally unacceptable. The question is not whether we will encounter Medusa, internally or externally, but how we will respond when we do. Medusa's myth ends with her death. Perseus beheads her, and that is where the story stops. There is no healing, no redemption, no restoration. She is defeated, and that is presented as heroic, as victory. But what if that is not the only possible ending? What if we could imagine a different story, one where Medusa is seen, where her voice is heard, where she is reintegrated rather than destroyed? Psychology offers possibilities that myth does not. Trauma can be processed. Shame can be challenged. Isolation can be broken. Identity can be reclaimed. It is not easy, and it is never complete, but it is possible. The power of engaging with myths psychologically is that we can rewrite the endings for ourselves. We do not have to accept that exclusion is permanent, or that the wounded must remain monsters. The most radical act in Medusa's story would be for someone to see her, truly see her, not as monster, but as person. To look past the serpents, past the curse, past the trauma, and recognize the human being who still exists underneath. This is what healing relationships offer. When someone sees us in our shame, our damage, our fear, and does not turn to stone, does not freeze, does not flee, does not reject, something profound shifts. The gaze that was always deadly becomes, for the first time, life-giving. But this requires risk on both sides. The wounded person must risk being seen. The other must risk seeing without defense. Both must resist the impulse to turn to stone. I want to ask you directly, what serpents are you carrying? What parts of yourself do you hide because you fear they will turn others to stone? What wounds have you been told make you monstrous? And perhaps more importantly, whose serpents have you failed to see? Who have you turned away from because their pain made you uncomfortable? Who have you treated as monster rather than wounded person? Medusa's story calls us to awareness of our own hidden pain and of our role in others' exclusion. We often focus on the monster or the hero, but there is a third position in these myths: the witness, the community, the society that decides who belongs and who is exiled. If Medusa is going to have a different ending, it will not come from her alone. It will come from a shift in how we collectively respond to the wounded, the different, the difficult. It will come from our willingness to see past the defensive serpents to the person who is hiding, hurting, hoping to be seen. The deepest lesson from Medusa's story is this: trauma and exclusion can transform you, but they do not have to define you. You can carry serpents and still be human. You can have been wounded and still be worthy of love. You can scare people with your truth and still deserve to be heard. Living with integrity means refusing to let others' inability to see you determine your worth. It means recognizing that the petrifying gaze is not your fault, that the isolation was imposed, that the monster was made, not born. And it means choosing, despite everything, to keep seeking connection, to keep hoping that someone will have the courage to truly see you and to not turn to stone. I will leave you with Medusa's question, the one the myth never answers. Can someone who has been turned into a monster ever become human again in the eyes of others? Can the excluded be welcomed back? Can the damaged be seen as whole? Your answer to that question, not just in theory, but in how you treat the wounded people in your life, might be the difference between perpetuating ancient cycles of exclusion or finally breaking them. Medusa is waiting to be seen, not feared, not defeated, not pitied, just seen as human.